Okay, like I said, I'll be talking to you about the Arms Trade Treaty, how it's come this far, and it's now ready for ratification by states. There's so much to speak about, but I'll try to be very, very short. First, the first part of the slides you'll see is all about the history of how or why there was an Arms Trade Treaty. Previous to that, there was this United Nations, what do you call, POA. That was simply a program of action for small arms and light weapons and their illicit use. Since then, about 2016, people started saying, no, we needed an arms trade treaty, a treaty that would be binding, that would be very useful for people, rather than those actions that will require reporting on an annual basis, and they didn't mean much at all. So, and in the Pacific, we also had a lot of issues, and then we asked questions, why do we need the arms trade treaty? We have to work together to ensure that small arms do not proliferate into our region. So a lot of people made statements. We, like the CARICOM or the Caribbean countries, also had problems with arms trade or small arms, and much of it was used for committing, violent crime and that sort of thing. So there was that need that there must be at least some kind of standard through an arms trade treaty. So after much talking, it eventually was, it came into action in April 2015, I think. Let me just go through the slides again. Yeah, we had more steps forward when we had Ambassador Peter Wilcock from Australia, who became the president of that conference. So it sort of pushed forward, and eventually that treaty has come into effect. It was first adopted in April 2013. It was signed by 130 countries, and it was ratified by 61 countries so far. The ATT went into force on the 24th of December in 2014, and there have been a series of meetings on how to move forward the conference, or the Arms Trade Treaty conference. So the first formal meeting was held in Port of Spain on the 23rd to the 24th of January 2015, early this year. And those conference state parties met for the first time to discuss who's going to be in charge of administration and all these other things that are required for a conference to take effect. And it was attended by 86 countries. 46 of those 86 ratified already. 39 were signatories. One of them was not a signatory but still attended, that was Botswana. And civil society that was involved numbered 47. There were also some anti-gun groups that attended the meeting as well. The second meeting is to be held in Vienna, and the third is being planned for Berlin. Okay, so we in the Pacific are now trying to see that this Arms Trade Treaty is the minimum standard that we must enhance. So the Pacific Small Arms Action Group has come together and is planning on publishing a couple of documents. One is a smaller version that will cover about 6 pages or so. That will really be an executive summary. And the other one is going to be a bigger one that will contain all the detailed legislative policy framework, the practice analysis, and it will be the basis for recommendations to our Pacific country governments. we are working on a title. The title will be Arms and the Pacific, a guide for Pacific government. And it's really an implementation guide. And of course, the rationale behind all this is, we have had a devastating impact. Pacific Island governments have a poor record of arms trade treaty implementation. And so far, we have Australia, New Zealand, and Samoa that have ratified out of 8 countries that signed. Those 8 countries that signed were Kiribati, Nauru, Palau, Tuvalu, and Vanuatu. Only 2 countries in the Pacific have made 2 reports based on the UNPOA, United Nations Program of Action for Small Arms and Light Weapons, in 2014. And previous to that, there was only 3 countries that made a report. So you see, our records of dealing with small arms too has not been very good. So the aim is to encourage the widespread of Pacific Island governments to implement the program of action, as well as to universalize the arms trade treaty, which would be a standard thing for many other countries here. And our objectives, especially what we think we do for our region, is to develop a comprehensive policy and advocacy platform, reduce the kind of vulnerability we have in the Pacific for the illicit use of arms, encourage widespread ratification of the arms trade treaty, progress and implement the ATT and of course the program of action that's required by United Nations, increase the number of Pacific Island governments completing those kind of reporting process. Yeah, and those various things that are not being done now, and we think with this process in place and with our small arms action group's assistance with this, as well as the funding the small arms action group has received from the United Nations support mechanism for the implementation of small arms, that will help to assist our governments to sign on for this small arms treaty. And of course, inside it, we'll have all the key concepts of what we are looking for in the Pacific against armed violence, gender issues. One of the things also we've been talking about is gender mainstreaming. Of course, what we've been discussing also, the human security aspects and the security sector reforms will also be covered in these documents. So they, like I said, it will be a missionary for documents for implementation, recommendations for small governments, as well as countries to work on. Those key frameworks that would also be involved in these particular publications are the Arms Trade Treaty, the UNPOA required for small arms and light weapons. Of course, the Pacific Regional Arms Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security, the Geneva Declaration on Armed Violence and Development, International Small Arms Control Standards, ISACs as they call them. Last December, there was a training of trainers in New Zealand, which I also attended, and talked about the preventive measures that's required to keep those arms that we have. I think we were also assisted in areas like PNG and Solomon Islands with what do you call those armories they made. The Australian government helped to make those armories to keep those small arms. Whether the governments are following those processes is another thing. We need somebody else to do that kind of investigations or evaluations to see whether what we preach are being applied. And of course, there's also the Arms Trade Treaty model law that was created by New Zealand and it's in circulation that will also form part of those that document that will be circulated. And of course, there's those Pacific Island Forum 90 weapons control bill. And of course, there are those national security policies of PNG and Fiji. So as my time comes to the end, and I don't want to take you up anymore. If you have any more, the audience is targeted are primarily all the Pacific policymakers and in the governments that we have. The secondary group being us, the CSOs, and how best we could implement or talk about how we can advocate for the arms trade treaty to be implemented and control the small arms proliferation within our small country. Thank you.